And we're live. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Good evening. This is Jack and Brendan. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a little bit. Before we do that, I will like to welcome you to tonight's webinar brought to you by OfferZen and Playroll. The topic for tonight is why South African talent is your 2024 hiring advantage. I'll be joining from OfferZen, Brendan coming in from Playroll. We'll talk a bit about what our companies do, and Jack from Doctorly. He's a customer, and he has done some really successful and quite active hiring from South Africa. So hopefully you can share some learnings. And we'll get them to introduce themselves in a bit. In the meantime, I'd like to invite anybody who's already on while we're waiting for some others to join to drop your name, where you're dialing in from in the chat, maybe your LinkedIn if you want. If you want to do some networking, feel free to do that. Be nice to know who we're dealing with in the audience. So feel free to do that while we wait a minute or two for a couple of others to join. So far, no joy. Maybe Jack can tell us a joke.
What did the crocodile say? Swallowed the.
Can you repeat the
That was
question?
a funny meal.
Can you repeat?
What did the crocodile say after it swallowed the clown? That was a funny meal.
Okay.
I am the father of 2 children, so this is the quality
Fair
of joke
enough.
that you
All
will
right,
get.
we'll move on to the content. I think. Thanks, Jack. Appreciate you being game. That was good. I found it funny. I'm a father. Okay, cool. Let's jump in, folks. My name is Steven. I'm the VP of Community at OfferZen. I'll be moderating tonight, so I think we're ready to get going. So before we get going, I just want to talk a little bit about the 2 companies that are here tonight. So the first one is OfferZen, and that's the company that I represent. We've been around for 6 years or so. If you're South African, you probably know us. If you're European, maybe less so. And what we do is we help developers get jobs at cool companies, and companies hire developers for their teams. And we've been doing that for a long time. We're a reverse marketplace where developers get job offers from companies with upfront salary, and we kind of pride ourselves on optimizing for the developer experience and being for devs by devs. Developer world is a complex place. It's hard enough to understand kind of the basics of recruitment, but dev recruitment in itself is a whole nother ballgame. So we basically just specialize in that. Our role in the kind of South African ecosystem is that we've traditionally been mostly around South Africans hiring South Africans. We've got 2,000 companies that hire through us. And what we've done recently is we've started to enable South Africans to work remotely for the rest of Europe, for companies like Jack's, Doctorly. So it's a privilege for us to host this tonight, and we're very excited to have Playroll here. So quickly talking about Playroll. So Playroll, what we found is a lot of times when companies want to hire folks remotely, it's quite difficult to get that set up. There's a lot of things you have to think about, and that's where partners like Playroll come in. And we'll hear a bit from Brendan a bit later. But with their solutions of payroll and employer of record, they can make it super, super easy to hire someone just remotely. So when you hire people in South Africa, let's say from Germany, there's a bunch of different options. And one of those is an employer of record. And Payroll really helps us out there. And they have a fantastic offering and amazing customer service, which is really what sets them apart, at least in my mind. But they have a whole suite of things that they offer, like all the way from like taxes, benefits, stock options, compliance. So it's essentially a whole solution. So if you're hiring remotely and you want to hire from South Africa, essentially the 2 companies work together in that respect, in that we have the talent and they have the way in which you can hire the talent. And Jack has figured out other ways to hire talent from South Africa as well by setting up his own entity and a bunch of other stuff. So those are the kinds of things that we'll explore. And we will jump into it in a little bit. So just a quick intro to the topic tonight. It's basically exploring this, that hiring talent and access to talent, both from a retention and an acquisition perspective, is still one of the biggest challenges for companies to grow. And it will continue to be, even though the market has changed somewhat. it still continues to be. And South Africa remains one of those pools that is ticks all the boxes. It's English speaking, it's in the time zone, it's great quality talent, and there's high volumes of it. So we're talking about the country, what the opportunities are there, what the risks are, and what the difficulties and the kind of friction points are, and how to overcome those to make sure that you're enabled to grow your team using South African talent. So that's the idea. And before we jump in, quick couple of house rules. You can see us, but we can't see you. So please jump into the chat. And there's also a questions feature in the chat. So if you want questions, there'll be Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions, you can bump them into the questions tab, and then we'll answer them. And by we, I mean myself and Jack, because we just lost Brendan, but hopefully he'll join soon. And then there's also some polls that'll pop up, and you'll be able to interact with those polls. And we'll do one of those just before we jump in. But before we do that, I thought let's start with a little intro from Jack. You can do an intro. So you tell us a little bit about who you are, a little bit about Doctorly, why you're here tonight, kind of your relationship with hiring South African developers, and lastly, what in your opinion, is the most underrated movie?
All righty. Who am I? My name is Jack. Actually, my name is Jörg, but I lived in Australia for 30 years, and the umlauts kind of killed that. So I decided to say, call me Jack. I have about 30 years in IT. It's the hair color. And I started as a developer and then moved up to leading engineering organizations. So now I'm in charge of all of the technology stuff at Doctorly. That includes DevOps, developers, cloud, architecture, development processes, QA, everything with bells and whistles, effectively. What does Doctorly do? Doctorly is trying to enable people to live healthier lives, initially by providing doctors with decent software to use in their practices so they can track people's diagnoses and medications and things. Initially, we said, well, this shouldn't take that long. That was 5 and a bit years ago now. We've been live for just over a year. So Germany is one of the most regulated markets, and lots of paperwork, lots of digital paperwork, lots of physical paperwork to actually get it done. So we're doing this in Germany. Tech stack, .NET, Postgres, React, TypeScript, nothing really bleeding edge or super sexy, because we're doing healthcare software. And this is the first job where if I get stuff really wrong, we can actually kill people.
Right. Fair enough.
We're trying to avoid that. Most underrated movie. This was a tricky one. I had to actually Google what a badly rated movie is. It turns out I have a lot of taste similarities with the worst movies on that list. So apparently, The Pursuit of Happiness is an underrated movie. Will Smith movie.
Right.
He's trying to get into Wall Street, looking after his kid, and they're living homeless, and apparently that's underrated, but I quite like it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. You see Jan's just joined. He's also made tech in Germany. I think we could do a whole webinar on trying to get through German bureaucracy, but we won't tonight, maybe to some extent. Brendan, how's your internet? You coming and going? Are you happy to do a quick intro and tell us about your most underrated movie?
Absolutely, Stephen. Thanks for having me. Apologies. The whole building went off and now it's back on. So it's not just my computer. The timing was perfect, but good to be here. Maybe just a quick intro on Playroll. So I'm one of the co-founders. We've been in existence for just over 2 years. In my previous life, for my sins, I ran a VAT recovery business. And in that business, we had many entities around the world, about 40 to 45, 1,200 people. We were hiring around the world, and we had this large infrastructure and network and expertise and the ability to basically, run distributed teams around the world. And we thought a great use of this infrastructure, besides for offering VAT recovery, was to get into the employer of record space. So we've had over 25 years of experience. And in a nutshell, we allow the ability for companies to hire people anywhere in the world at the click of a button without having to set up any infrastructure. We offer visa support, benefits. We can migrate from existing entities. And I think what's really relevant today, Stephen, as you know, is we've actually hired a huge amount of talent through OfferZen for our international client base in South Africa and in Europe, but particularly today talking about South Africa because it's such an interesting space for distributed talent, particularly for international companies. So I think that's the relevance of Playroll today. And then in terms of underrated movie, I'd have to go with a Baz Luhrmann film. I'm always a Baz Luhrmann enthusiast, and I'm going to go with The Great Gatsby, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Nice.
Well, I think one of the greats.
Lovely.
Yeah, I like that too. So I don't get it. Why, how can all of these underrated movies be the same as the things I like?
Not everyone has a discerning taste like you, Jack. All right, so jumping in then, and I think Bryn, your kind of talk about you've seen an industry kind of industry level thing, and we can jump Jack into your kind of like your story later or after this. I think let's talk about 2023. Like, where do we find ourselves in the kind of the constraints, the skills shortages, the kind of what's happening in the talent market, specifically developer talent market? With kind of the macroeconomic system changing, and what are you seeing from the customers that you have, Brent, and what role does South Africa play there?
So I think firstly, it's no secret that companies are tightening their belts depending on the life cycle that they're at. We're seeing certainly in early to late stage VC, there's a lot of belt tightening going on, and certainly developer talent, let's just talk about it from a cost perspective, is something that companies are definitely starting to look at. And we run, just in Playroll alone, we have a large developer team and it's distributed. But to make the buck go further, I think companies are starting to think about ways to be able to hire more people at a same or same overall cost. And really, South Africa, from that perspective, is we really educating our clients on the market because, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but there's so many unique factors about being able to hire talent in South Africa. But let's talk about cost. I mean, I think you'll show the stats, but we're seeing costs coming in at 25% of the total cost in Europe, and I think it's a very, very easy way to be able to make your buck go further and get talent, and particularly in a market where location doesn't matter as much anymore. This COVID wave has really opened up the ability to be able to hire talent for talent and not by location. So remote work, particularly in technology teams, we're seeing companies being able to shift their tactics and their strategy and be able to go into markets where they can find the best talent at a much cheaper price on a similar time zone, and English speaking as well. So certainly from a cost perspective, and then just in terms of developer talent, we're seeing, South Africa is really producing world-class talent that can compete with the rest of the world. So when it comes to looking at a territory, I know Eastern Europe is quite popular, and we do a lot together in Europe as well on the talent side, but particularly South Africa, I think we are definitely starting to see the emergence, and it has been for many years, but it's been an unknown talent pool, and I think it's coming to the surface now. So it's interesting. South Africa at the moment for us is the most popular country of hiring across all roles, but particularly tech talent. So you're definitely starting to see a shift, to the shores of South Africa.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brent. I think that resonates a lot with what we've seen in the market as well. Jack, as someone who's been rather enthusiastically hiring South Africans for some time, does it resonate with you, or what's the kind of logic on your side?
It does. And I've worked with nearshoring companies or outsourcing companies in India, in Eastern Europe, and now in South Africa. There are pros and cons to all of these, right? But for me, the big thing at the moment is I've got a fairly small team. We're already distributed, which is hard enough. And then having like a 6-hour time shift or like difficulty in communication language wise, And even if we all speak English, we don't always completely understand each other. In a lot of cases, when English is the second language for some people and some other people, those people speaking English are saying the same words and meaning something totally different. So time zone, availability, English language skills, and just also access to decent quality staff at lower than European costs, right? Like I'm running a business. If I can pay 2/3 of the price of German developers, then over time I can employ more people and get more stuff done for the same amount of money. So it just makes math sense to it.
Yeah. Okay. So those are all relatively the same factors. We have a poll which we can ask, which we're going to ask everyone just real quickly, just to get an idea of who has successfully hired talent from South Africa, whether it's remote or relocation. If you're not in South Africa, then if you're in South Africa, then you can skip it. But I will submit the vote. Cool. There's a poll. Thank you for participating. Okay, so we talk about the super high level bits of it. It makes sense from an employer perspective. Some of the data maybe that I can share from the OfferZen survey. We basically do these massive surveys of around 4,000 developers every year. We've just got the new results coming in, and it's in the region of 97% of South African developers are interested in international opportunities over different opt-in levels, whether that's kind of remote or hybrid. Something similar, like 97% of them preferring remote and hybrid, and 90% of them already being in remote and hybrid setups. And I think that's the thing I think we mentioned a bit earlier, is that COVID switched the default to everybody's in that situation now. It's not a pipe dream anymore. We've been doing these surveys for a long time, and hybrid and remote was always what everybody wanted, and now it's become the reality.
Yeah.
I think so. The one thing that I would be interested to hear from you, Jack, is as South Africans, there's a narrative amongst international opportunities seem to hold a bigger weight than the local opportunity. It's the world stage, that kind of thing. Have you found it when you're talking to South African candidates and people in South Africa that they respond in that way, and that they see a European company as kind of interesting or holding more weight just because of the fact that it's not South African?
I haven't specifically found that. Doctorly being a healthcare business and trying to find people who match our values to join us, people who are interested in doing something useful, people who are interested in healthcare, people who want to make the world a better place, that's more uniting for us than people saying, I'd love to work for somebody outside of South Africa. The other big driver with people who are wanting to work for us is the remote aspect. That's a big benefit for them that they don't necessarily get locally. And I used to work for a company that had an office in South Africa that made people go into the office even during the COVID pandemic, where I'm like, why would you do this to people? So this ability to work remotely and work in a high quality team, work in a good team, even though it's remote, that's more interesting than working for a European company. For the people that I have, certainly.
Gotcha. And Brendan, from your side, do you get much insight from a talent level? I'm not sure to what extent your platform really speaks to the talent side. Is there, number one, is there a feedback loop, and how much do you kind of know from that side of the marketplace? And secondly, are you experiencing a similar kind of propensity or a willingness from South Africans to work for European companies, or are they also just kind of remote and we'll take it? You're muted, unfortunately. Just give us a sec. I'm gonna have to unmute. Thanks. You got it? There we go.
Back, yeah. So I think just on your first question, in terms of the feedback loop, I don't have statistics on hand, but what I can tell you anecdotally is that the way we work is obviously we do help our international clients. If they're battling to source talents, we connect them with partners like yourselves. And the feedback loop comes from the client. We we have regular QBRs with our clients to understand if they're happy with our service, if they're happy with the talent. And we very much focused on the employees and their happiness, but we know immediately if there's a problem with talent from the clients. And I can just tell anecdotally that from a South African talent perspective, and as I said earlier, it's our most popular market for hiring across all roles, is that the level of talent and the certainly meeting expectation, and I'd say above expectation. And I think that goes down, and you can hear I can't hide my accent, but I've been living in London for 19 years, but come from South Africa, and really that's down to a top class education system. You can find very skilled workers, particularly in engineering, accountancy, and law. So I think from a talent capability perspective, what we see from the ground is that they're very satisfied. Onto your second question, just remind me what it was, Stephen.
I think I think you're gonna put them together in that same answer, really. Of are the candidates interested in
what are they looking for? Yeah, are they interested in? Yeah, and they absolutely. I think what we're seeing is that it's easier to sell an international role to a South African candidate than a local role, and I think the key point here is exposure. And that's exposure to what the best looks like, and I think there's a hunger for South Africans growing their careers to really work with the best people in the best skill sets in the best markets, and I think certainly from an internal perspective, even in payroll, we have a large chunk of our staff in London as an example, and it's a big attraction for the South Africans that we're hiring to be working with the guys here because they can really see what best in class looks like.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I like what you said there, Jack. Around it's not necessarily the European company as the axiom; it's the other option. It's remote. Number one is one of the things, but what we also saw in our Developer Nation survey is that growth opportunities, room for growth, is really one of the massive drivers to new jobs as well as retention. And I think what we're seeing at the international stage is you have the likes of these companies are solving massive problems. Like we don't have that many mid-tech companies in South Africa that are operating on a global stage. So I think that is quite interesting. One thing that kind of springs to mind, you mentioned, Brendan, you're in London, or have been in London a long time. I think that's a typical trade route for South African kind of talent, essentially. Do you see corridors developing between specific countries, let's say like the UK, South Africa? Is that a corridor? Is the Netherlands, South Africa a corridor? Are those kinds of concepts a real thing when it comes to remote talent?
Absolutely. So when we're looking at geographies that are interested in hiring in South Africa, we're seeing obviously a very strong interest from London. You mentioned the Netherlands. Canada is becoming more and more prominent. Oh, really? Australia. The US, I think, is starting. We're starting to see more and more US clients looking at South Africa, although they're far more uneducated than the European counterparts. But I would say I think the top 5 that we're hiring in South Africa would be UK, Netherlands, Canada, USA, and Australia at the moment.
Yeah, Jack, you're Berlin based, right, Jack?
Yep.
Yeah. So what's it like there? You feel like everybody you've got a secret that you don't want to share with everybody else, that you've got this pool of great talent that other people don't know about, or is it kind of a generally accepted kind of pool?
No, I think the pool in South Africa is quite deep and good to swim in, right? And this is also one of the choices for going there, because Eastern Europe, for a period of time, everybody went to Eastern Europe, right? And that was kind of and then you were one of all of these other people in Eastern Europe trying to compete with a bunch of other companies. And Delivery Hero, they're hard to compete with in Berlin because of the salaries they pay and the things that they can do as a massive company. They went to Eastern Europe, and it's the same there. So they robbed the market for themselves, or Amazon, eBay, all of these companies. Whereas South Africa, when I started working with people in South Africa, that was relatively untapped. And everybody's like, why South Africa? I'm like, nobody else is here, so I get dibs, right? That's starting to change now as more people are coming in, and companies like Payroll are making it a lot easier. Like, I set up my own company in South Africa. The things I don't ever want to do again is setting up a bank account with Standard Bank, is setting up anything to do with SARS. Good Lord, help me, if I knew that this was what was going to happen, I probably wouldn't have done it, right? Like, it's just, people don't understand how painful this can be unless you've been through it. So I think that's a big thing where like companies like Payroll really give like a huge advantage, where you can do the same thing, but you don't have to hurt for it.
Yeah, I think Brendan must be happy to hear you saying that.
That's a great advertisement for EOR, Jack. Thanks for that.
But
even though I don't use you, but like, if I would have known how bad it was, like, we've just gone through like 2 years of back taxes with SARS, and it feels like, it doesn't feel good. I can't say that politely how this feels.
So Brendan, you folks what is quite interesting is you pivoted as one of the founders into, from VerTT into Payroll, and obviously you see this opportunity. To what extent do you feel that the kind of there's a surge of people that are becoming clients, like Jack and these folks that have been playing this game? You mentioned, you're gaining steam. Is global hiring, is it mammothly increasing? Is it kind of increasing? Is it just trickling up? And is it recover? Was a COVID boom, or is it just a global trend that's kind of unstoppable?
I think we definitely have seen a slowdown since the COVID boom. And that's really just the macroeconomic situation. And that's really globally. But I think what's interesting is that I don't think that decreases the demand for EOR, because actually what's happened now is, since EOR was a very relatively unknown concept, you can see Jack didn't know about it when he started in South Africa. And what you're seeing is there was the surge in COVID, and a lot of players in the market really came to prominence over that time. And what you're starting to see is the market now slowly getting educated globally, and it's a very large market. So although we're going through a macroeconomic slowdown, what you are seeing is still an enormous demand for the product, because of the market education starting to happen.
Yeah.
And so even if, guys are hiring at 60% less than they were the year before, they're now understanding that if they're expanding, or if they're looking to close entities, they don't have to close whole offices. They can use this model to be able to still be in region without having to go through the pain of opening up bank accounts with the likes of Standard Bank.
Another thing that we've seen is like Berlin-based companies that have, they're on retrenchment round 3 thanks to the macroeconomics. But so they've basically, I think most of what happens, retrenchments to get down to kind of profitable unit economics, and then you kind of move into a stable state, right? But then you're doing backfill hiring, there's natural kind of people moving on and that kind of thing. And when you get to that, your new mode is backfill within profitability. So you're really under the crunch from both an employment fees perspective, a recruiter fees perspective, a salary budget perspective. And I think that's something that we've been trying to push a bit. One thing, while you're talking about kind of the role of EOR and making that possible, is I was actually working with your team, Brent. I don't know if you've ever seen this thing actually, but I'm going to just throw it up on the screen. Is just to compare the South African, what a developer costs in South Africa versus this is just the UK, because we were working on the UK at the time. And you can see, so this is a senior software developer in the UK. And over here, this light blue is the provided salary. So I'm saying, like, look, if I'm going to pay 85,000 in the UK, then I'm sitting well above the range, well, over here. And this the square, or the purple square, is what the South African would cost you, essentially. So if you move that, let's just for fun move that down to 55,000. So basically, if I'm going to pay the median in the UK, if I translate that based on the kind of a distribution model to the South Africa, we're going to be paying well above the median. So that just shows you that you're paying, that once you translate the salaries, now this is all UK, not necessarily London. So granted, there's a bunch of differences there. But it just shows you there's a direct salary translation. But one thing that was quite startling to me when I did this exercise with the team is just, if we look at this little graph here, the employer of record costs, obviously, yes, you have to add them on if you're hiring from South Africa as a UK company. But if you compare them to the mandatory employer costs, which are in the region of £8,000 in a year, versus in South Africa, which is 560, whether that's good or bad, it's probably a different discussion that they're so low. But I mean, it's 4 times the EOR cost. So, you've got these extra costs on top, but at the same time, you don't have to backfill with SARS and do all of those kinds of things and pay at the same time as not having to pay the United Kingdom these mandatory employer costs. So I thought that was like quite an interesting discovery of going, there's both a salary arbitrage, which is the difference between the blue. Obviously, there's some extra costs, but there's massive mandatory employer savings, mandatory employer cost savings.
If you're looking at Germany, for example, if you have a salary of somebody, you have to calculate somewhere between 25 and 33% on top for taxes, health insurance, pension, whatever. Yeah. And what we do is we pay people health insurance in South Africa. We pay people pensions in South Africa. We pay for all of these benefits, which people are not always used to getting. And it's still way cheaper than here, right? Yeah. And so, like, out of that money, like, giving some of it to the people and keeping a section of it for ourselves, everybody's winning. We're not trying to, like, we're all talking about cheaper costs, but we're not trying to screw people for the last, like, rand, because that's no fun for anybody. But they're getting a really good deal and we're getting a really good deal. So it's win-win, and that's what makes everybody really positive about it.
100%. Brendan, do you have any comments on that thing I just showed on the screen?
No, well, it's a stark difference, and the reason is obviously base salaries as a start are much lower there because of currency conversion and market prices. But it's this employer cost. It's the tax that employers are paying, particularly in Europe. It's an enormous range. I mean, I think the UK is at 13.8%, and it ranges all the way up to 40% when you're getting to the likes of Italy and France. So this, in these Western democracies, particularly, the social cost of hiring employees from a company perspective is enormous. And really, when you trade that off against, you can take that budget, you can halve it, and you can still get top of market talent. It makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think, okay, so there's the cost arbitrage, and I like what you're saying there, Jack, is that there's value on the table, therefore everybody wins, right? We're not negotiating one of us up or the other one down. Obviously, what does happen when we see these transactions happen in our marketplace is that the dev says, well, I should be paid British salary, and the company says, well, I should be paying South African, and we try and encourage, look, guys, there's value on the table. There's a win-win here, that we don't have to have a big winner and a small winner.
It does happen occasionally that people in South Africa will then, after having experienced working with European or American companies, kind of want this immense salary. And that's something where you then have to have a discussion with them and say, okay, look, what are you getting for it? What are we getting for it? Where's it fair for everybody to land? And none of us is ever going to say, pay me less, right? These are not words that come out of most humans' mouths in a normal case. Because the three of us, if we got a salary increase tomorrow, we wouldn't be saying no, thank you, right? Not mentioning that we're probably all doing okay. It's the same for everybody else. So everybody's trying to win for their families, for themselves. But once they understand we're all winning together, and you get to work with a great team, you get all these other things as well, that's where the sweet spot is. And a lot of people in South Africa, I think, understand that even better than people from perhaps Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that is interesting, especially if one of the reasons that you're hiring from it is the depth of the talent pool, right? And you're saying, look, I'm hiring because there's lots of you, essentially. So you're not a snowflake necessarily, and there's value on the table. But at the end of the day, I think that compounded with the current macroeconomic climate does put a bit more power into the kind of employer's hand. One thing I wanted to go back, I don't know if you're ready for this, you might have some PTSD here, Jack. There's a bunch of different options. Let's say you want to hire South African developers. We've had this conversation. Look, okay, this makes sense. There's a salary arbitrage. Jan, we'll definitely get into the culture stuff and the Q&A side, so I'm going to push that a little bit part in the conversation. But there's a bunch of benefits, right? So it's like, okay, let's say we want to do this, but like at the time when you were doing it, Jack, what are the options you considered, and what are the options now, and what should people think about when they're thinking about this?
In terms of what benefits to offer or where to go?
Sorry, I mean, okay, so you've decided, look, I want to do the thing. The how is really my question. You set up an entity. You said it was painful. There's other options. Like, what did you consider, and what's that journey?
So initially, we're partners with the Delta. Maybe people have heard of them in South Africa. So we're in the same ecosystem. Actually, we own bits of them, they own bits of us, and it's all like a bit like, I call it startup incest in the funniest possible way. So it is like we're very interwoven. So when we started working in South Africa, I'd worked with people in South Africa before. I really enjoyed working with them at a previous company. We were looking for extra people. And so we went to the Delta and said, hey, look, can we have a team from you guys? That was the initial starting point. And then as we grew and grew there, we're like, okay, this doesn't make sense, because just paying like outsourcing rates, like that's a lot of money, quick start. But then we're like, all right, so what are we going to do? How big are we going to get this? And we chose to kind of go with most of our development resources forever are going to be in South Africa. So that was a business decision. And that's why we chose to hire a HR person, set up an entity, and go through the pain. We didn't know about the other options, but at the volume we were talking about, we figured we'd be cheaper off. And financially, we are better off than doing it through a third party. It's how much it hurts, right? But like, if you're in a startup and you don't like pain, you're probably doing something wrong anyway. So that was kind of the choice. But if you want 2 or 3 people, I recommend to go through somebody, because there's no point to set it up if you want to try it out. And then once you've got 20, okay, maybe then spinning out an entity and really doing it.
Yeah, Brendan, maybe you can comment on that, right? Like, so EORs, for those of you that don't know, basically they you employ people through them. So essentially, they take care of all their hassle. Well, not all of it. I think they'll give you some caveats and a couple of stars in the contract, but for the most part, they make your life a lot easier. A lot of the companies that we speak to have that same thing, Jack, as you say. We start with 1 or 2, and we have EORs as partners. And I suppose the development of EORs was, it was a commodity game, race to the bottom on the pricing side at the beginning. But then you quickly realize that as soon as people reach what Jack's saying, a certain number of people, you start to lose your customers. And then you need a deeper value prop. Can you talk a little bit about like Playroll's understanding of how where your ideal customers is, just for 1 or 2, or do you scale it all the way up to 20 now that you have full payrolling solutions and other kind of global workforce management and that kind of stuff?
So it's very dependent on the customer, but I mean, we've got, if I look at live examples in South Africa, we help guys that want 1 person, so their first hire. And again, just to clarify, we're not like an outsourced solution of staff. Effectively, what happens is you find the people that you want. We can help you find them. OfferZen, obviously, one of our main partners there, particularly on the tech side. But we are the legal employer, and the client would be the employer in substance. So it's effectively like having your own employee in country. They're on your own system. They would basically report to your own managers. They would follow your own HR policies. So I think it's very important to understand that it's the way the model works is it's effectively your own staff member without having to set up the infrastructure. So as part of that, you're able to get advice on benefits. Your bank accounts are set up immediately. You get payrolled, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot of clients that then scale their teams and do well. We've got clients that have got 50 to 80 people still on our platform under the EOR model, and then pricing. We work on a sliding scale so that we get the pricing right, but that we don't have to go into that at the moment. But I think we're partners to our clients, and really when it makes sense to start opening up an entity, and I would probably say those conversations are happening around 50 employees, 30 to 50 employees. Then absolutely you're able to get supported, whoever you use from an EOR perspective. Your provider should be able to support you, to offboard you, make sure that you got your own entity, sit comfortably, and you can run it on your own. Payroll are launching a payroll domestic service across 80 territories over the next few months. So that will be part of our platform in the future. But absolutely, that is the product life cycle. So you often see it from contractor to full-time employee on the EOR model, then onto your own entity. And really that's, a loop that you'll see. And you've got to find providers that can help you with the local expertise to basically understand, what you should be offering, what benefits you should be offering in the territory, and then making sure that payroll is accurate, is on time, and that your employees are happy. So, obviously lots to think about to make sure that the employees get the local experience.
Yeah. So you is that the general trend that you see as we go the contractor, EOR, and then like entity essentially?
Yeah. Although, and again, I've got statistics on this, but we actually don't see a huge fall off from EOR onto own entity, unless things scale massively. But it's obviously an option. And again, I think you've got to find a provider that will partner with you and give you the right advice on when to move over, if that's something that's good for the business.
Cool. I just want to also share, we've been working on this thing together with the Payroll team, and I would love any feedback from it from anybody who wants to play with it. I'll put it on. We'll share it with you folks afterwards, and I'll also just drop the link in a second. But essentially, what we've done is there's this thing called Gitbook. Essentially, it's quite nice. It's got like Git repos and stuff like that. But we put together this guide to hiring South African developers, and it's got about our tech ecosystem. Essentially, it's for people that are interested that don't know anything about it. And in here we actually have what we're talking about now, which is the EOR versus relocation versus having a legal entity versus having contractors and all that kind of thing. So I wanted to just kind of show this thing. We've got a whole bunch of things about like how to establish a legal entity. There's obviously a bunch of stuff here, which mentions payroll and getting a good price from them, which by the way you can. So if folks are interested in these things that we're talking about, yeah, sorry Jack, we should actually just put your horror stories in the like back page in the anti-testimony.
Yeah, I'll give you some good what can possibly go wrong stories.
100%. So we have this thing. Like when I say we put it. There was nothing good enough in the market. So would love some feedback on it. If you see opportunities to add stories, horror stories from you, Jack, or extra data, Brent, then that would be awesome to add. And anybody else who's kind of in the audience. Cool. I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to open up to some of the questions. The first one we've actually got here is already from Jan. He's talking about the cultural aspects. So I think as someone who's running the business, Jack, you mentioned like kind of language barriers and all that kind of stuff. What I found quite difficult in, let's say, trying to build the value proposition for South African developers, we're trying to sell the category because that's what we have. I always say, culturally they're great, but how do I quantify that? What stories do I tell? We have this slide, which is actually just a bit cheesy, where I'm actually going to show it just because I want to. And it's actually pretty stupid, to be honest, but we do that. We like literally have this picture of these guys, and we're like, listen, these guys made it. These South African guys are like hardworking guys. It's like David Sachs and Rudolf Puerta and Friedberg stuff. So, like, how do you think about that? Like from a cultural perspective, we keep saying, they're great, they were hard workers and all that kind of thing. First of all, is that a thing, or is it something that we as South Africans are imagining? And secondly, how do I sell that to clients?
So you've got both, right? There's no such thing as all South Africans are hardworking, the same way that not all Germans are punctual and not all Australians are alcoholics, right? It's like it does differentiate between individuals, says the person who it's gone 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, but if you choose the right individuals, I think then that's where it matters. You do have to look at the people. We've had people who we've hired who've interviewed really well, who've done technical tasks really well, who sounded really good, who turned out to be terrible. It's the same as when you're employing anybody else. You've got to keep an eye on it. And if they're no good, they'll have to go. If you are employing yourself in South Africa, getting somebody to go can be more challenging than I expected. I didn't expect to go to South Africa and have more stringent labor laws than in Germany, right? But that's a fact. If you're going through an employer of record, maybe you can get away with it, but somebody's got to let the poor sucker go if he's no good or she's no good, right? So vetting people, making sure they're fit. For me, and at Dockley in general, we've got a lot of English people. We've got a lot of people from different cultures. So this melting pot culture that Dockley already is good. If you're a completely straight-laced shirt and tie company from Germany, you may find cultural differences bigger with South African developers, right? So that's definitely a thing. As an Australian, I think Australia and South Africa's cultures are fairly compatible. We like barbecues. You call them the wrong thing. We all like drinking and sports. So this works really well on a team level and an integration level. And then if you're hiring remotely, there's all of the trouble of how can you make these people feel part of your team? How can you really get them to contribute? The good ones, they're awesome. But the one thing that I have found about South African developers in general, and this is a generalization, but they tend to be a bit more reserved. There are some of my staff who still insist on calling me sir, and I'm just can I go out and shoot myself? I haven't been sir to anybody ever. It's not how I feel, and it makes me actually feel uncomfortable, and they persist in doing this. I think they're probably just trying to annoy me by now, but having them be more reserved and not say when they think something is wrong, and really having to dig them out of this hole and get them talking, that's challenging.
No, okay. So there are some generalizations, and I think that South African is a conservative culture. Having moved here to the Netherlands, I suppose we're right wing now, but things change. It's been a journey. So the cultural things to watch out, Bren, from your side. What do you think obviously you say you've got a lot of companies that are really happy with their South Africans and all that kind of thing. In general, with this remote EOR setups, what's the first thing that goes wrong generally in that culturally? What are the not great stories that you hear?
I think it's difficult to pinpoint because as Jack said, you're going to have problems wherever you hire. You're never going to find the best people or the right people for your culture fit 100% of the time. I think where we find things go wrong, and I think a lot of it is around internal remote management. So we do a lot of work when we're onboarding clients around, how do you manage the remote team? How do you get them involved? How do you get them to culturally fit in and feel part of the business? So I think there's a lot of work for internal clients when they're looking at this model to make sure that people fit in if you're going to be running remote tech teams. I think, that's something to certainly focus on. And I think you also just got to go into this with your eyes open. Even if I'm biased, but we love to drink beer and we have braais because that's what we call it, Jack. It's the real word.
Wrong word.
You're always going to encounter people that don't fit your company, and you're going to have to go down a termination.
Yep.
So I think, and maybe one of the advantages of going with an EOR is that local expertise. So I actually personally find both internally and with our clients, with South Africans, that terminations, and I know you mentioned it's stricter than Germany, but we actually find we've been in the market there for 23 years. The terminations are actually something that I wouldn't say we're good at it in terms of making the process as easy and as less costly as possible. So yeah, I think it's like everything, but I think there is generally it's a Western country. It's in terms of the cultural differences, it's very much like, I think South Africans fit in very well in places like the UK, even in America. And there are a lot of differences, and I think just the education system, and when you're hiring from institutions that and again, that's something that we help a lot with. We just educating our clients on what are the good institutions, what kind of candidates they bring out. I think you've got a good bet of getting somebody that can culturally fit your organization.
Yeah, That's a great segue into Oliver's question here. I'll also just, again, shameless plug of this content that we've been working on. But in here, we've got this education section. So what we do at OfferZen, and you can see there's a whole bunch of degree status here. So we see there's a lot of people that are kind of on OfferZen. We've got essentially boot camps and universities. Now, on OfferZen, we curate the talent, right? And it must be quite hard to hire from a country where you don't know which university is good and which one is bad and which one gives paper degrees that are bought and which ones are actually reliable institutions. So I think it's one of the problems we solve as OfferZen, especially if you look at it. So this is from the 2020. This is actually a relatively old one. It's 2020, but I know the data hasn't changed. Is that 26% of these software developers are self-taught. So the relying on universities as a kind of indicator is very useful. And we've got some guides here, and would love any feedback that you have on it. But it's also important to know that, the testing and that kind of stuff, we do some first level curation, but Jack, as you know, you do the rest of the testing yourself. That's already difficult with university degrees and all that kind of stuff. But now with kind of AI and LLM assisted assessment and all that kind of stuff, the world has become even kind of more difficult and interesting. But there's some stuff in that you can have a look at. And Brennan and Jack, if you've got anything else to add there.
And if, Oliver, you said you have to hire somebody with like a computer science degree. All right, look, I have a computer science degree. I got that in a previous century. Like, does it actually matter anymore? So it really does. Like, I do remember parts of that. There was the pub, there was the billiard table, but and I'm sure I learned stuff back then. And it depends. Are you hiring a junior fresh out of university and you want somebody who has like learned the basics and who you're still going to have to teach everything else again anyway? Or is it just a formal requirement? If it's just a formal requirement and they've got 20 years of experience, who cares? So it depends on your needs, right? I do know like Stellenbosch and other universities in South Africa, there are really high quality universities that produce really excellent candidates, and also people who are going towards research and things like that. If you're looking for those kind of people, they're definitely available. It depends on your needs. If it's a tick in the box, you can achieve it with anything. If it's, I want somebody from us who's junior, but at a particular quality level, you can get that in South Africa as well as a bunch of other places.
What we do is we have a list of universities and boot camps which we find authoritative, and we ignore all the rest. So this list that we've got in this thing, so it does matter for when it matters, and then it just really doesn't when it doesn't, kind of thing. Yeah. It's a bit of a silly answer, but so we basically have a scoring mechanic, and it's the same thing with the boot camps. We see a massive difference between the boot camps in South Africa. We also have an article about which boot camps are kind of the best. And our curation algorithm kind of predicts how many interview requests candidates are going to get based on what the previous kind of candidates have got on our platform. We've got a high volume platform, been running for 6 years, so we have quite a bit of data here. So it's not our opinion of the boot camps; it's whether these people get jobs or not. So it does matter, but I must can't give the secret sauce of the algorithm, but it's the obvious ones that are, for the most part, that are the most reputable. We have another question from Courtney. So any advice on retaining South African talent for a South African business now, where there being such a large global demand for talent right now? South African companies have been competing against each other, and now more and more they're competing on the world stage. Any advice for those businesses?
Treat them well, pay them healthcare, pay them benefits, give them sick leave, let them work from home. Like, they just want the same stuff. Like, the salary difference, like maybe you can get a little bit higher, but like what I'm seeing, the people that I'm getting are just not getting the things that they want locally. But like, and so this is remote work, this is decent benefits, this is treating them like a human, like just the normal stuff that we all like individually expect. So what would make you happy at work, probably going to make the next person reasonably happy at work too.
Yeah, I can only reiterate that, Jack. We've got in the VAT IT group over 3,000 staff in South Africa, and with a really good retention rate. And again, I suppose one thing that does help is having a successful business as well. That always helps when they feel like they're growing with something. But I think invest in them. So besides for the nice things, benefits remote work, and a lot of South African companies don't offer remote work currently, and I strongly suggest at least a hybrid model. But I think invest in their personal development and their professional development. There's a lot that you can do to make to make the workplace a very happy place. Give them breakfast. The great thing about it is that it's pretty cheap compared to any other office. So you can actually create a really nice environment at a fraction of the cost to foreign offices. So I know in a South African office, to provide them meals, you can have early breakfast, dinners in the evenings. You can have staff and kitchens to facilitate this at a fraction of the cost in other territories.
Yeah, I think there's a certain beautiful beauty in the simplicity there of just, you don't need to be international, you just need to be good, right? And just give the people what they want, and simply treat people like humans. I think it's very, as a South African.
Your audio's gone.
You have your reverence for Europe and the US, and you think there's just no way that you can do what they do. But at the end of the day, they're just offering the same thing: remote, good treatment, good benefits, and all that kind of thing. I think that's pretty good advice. We're closing up to the end soon, so I just want to check with Jack and Brent. Are there things that you both, or either of you, are itching to say or think would be very useful for the people listening?
I would just say, give it a go, guys. Particularly with the current models that are out there, you don't actually have to invest a huge amount in infrastructure anymore. That pain is gone. So you can actually do it in a very flexible and reversible way if it doesn't work out for you. So I would say give it a go. And if it doesn't work, great. But I think you'll find if it does work, it's the land of opportunity. And I actually encourage you to look further than only developers. But, the talent market there is vast. We run finance, legal, service. We have a lot of teams based out of South Africa for our international businesses. And it definitely can work.
And the creatives as well. I keep getting blown away every time I go to Cape Town. I get emails from South African companies. I think the marketing and creative side of South Africans is really, really strong. We're interviewing product marketers at the moment, and the quality is incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, if you don't know what this term means, go away and Google load shedding. You'll have to deal with it. This is this is something that people will just have to get used to. All of the people in South Africa are used to it, unfortunately. There's some lucky ones who are not subject to this, but this is a definite thing. I hope this is in your document guide too. If this is not, Stefan, really missed out. There has to be a whole page about load shedding and cable theft. But today, my U-Bahn in Berlin got stuck because some idiot stole the cable. So it's obviously spreading. So there's that. And if you want to do it exclusively for Java developers, Angular developers, PHP developers, because I don't need those. So those are the ones that I go and get from South Africa, and leave me the ones that I actually need.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jack. Okay, so just time to wrap up. We'll send out a mail afterwards with a bunch of the links and stuff that we chatted through. We also have kind of discounted offers for those folks that haven't tried it out yet, that are keen to hire. You get 20% off your payroll fee and 10% off any hiring through OfferZen. If you would like that, you can just click yes, please, or no, thanks on the screen now. That's a pretty handy little opt-in thing. Cool. So if you're interested, you can grab it and we'll be in touch with that. Otherwise, all the links and stuff will be in the mails. To you, Jack and Bren, were you having load shedding at the beginning there, Bren? Is that what was happening?
I'm in London, but I'm going to find out.
That's hilarious. Okay, well, to both of you, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us some time. We really appreciate it. We hope we've created some value for the people listening. And to those of you that joined, thank you for spending your early evening with us, depending on where you are. And as I said, all the content will be sent out, a bunch of links. If you have any questions or if you have any feedback on the guide, please shout. Otherwise, have a lovely evening, folks, and thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.